Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
Nobody ever sat in the first row when I was working here either. I always felt badly for the speakers because there were always people way in the back, and the front was this lonely island. Can you hear me okay in the back? Yeah? What's that? The green light's on. You want to adjust that? How about now? How about now? Can you guys give me some feedback from the back? Is that any better? How about if I shout?
We can hear you. The question is whether it's getting recorded. Yeah.
So we're good on both? Okay, great. Good to know. Thank you for answering that question a minute after I... Good afternoon. It's great to be back. I worked at Microsoft. I should introduce myself. Kim introduced me. There's a picture of me in non-Microsoft clothing in Sri Lanka at the opening of one of our schools. From 1991 until 1999. I have occasionally come back to campus. It keeps getting bigger and bigger, and I keep getting more and more confused and more lost. But thankfully, got here on time today, and it's good to see such a large crowd. The book has only been out. The book is called Leaving Microsoft to Change the World, and it has only been out for about 3 weeks, and we've had a fantastic reception so far. We're really excited about what we're seeing. We've been in San Francisco, New York, Greenwich, Connecticut, Toronto, Chicago. Last night we were even on San Juan Island. The San Juan Island people requested we fly up and do a presentation. It had 75 people, and they donated $50,000 from the audience just last night in San Juan Island, which is the wealthiest zip code in the state of Washington, by the way. However, we know that all of you also come from wealthy zip codes, so we've done our research. We know our numbers. We got our data. But it's been really fun to watch the reaction we've gotten thus far to the book and to the cause of global education. Let me start by talking a bit about Room to Read and how we got started, and I'm going to talk a bit more about the book. And what I want to cover third are how I've taken the lessons I learned at Microsoft during the 1990s and have tried to apply them to the social sector and trying to take, the Ballmerisms that we've all known to, grown up loving and applying them to the social sector. So first and foremost, Room to Read is the name of the charity I started. I started it as a hobby when I was at Microsoft, and then it grew from a hobby into an obsession, and it grew from an obsession into whatever it is obsessions grow into. A pathological obsession, I guess, to bring literacy and books and libraries to the children of the developing world. I was a product manager, so if you're not a product manager, you're probably all going to cringe as you hear me do these marketing type things, like tell you that we've reduced our entire ethos to 6 words, because consumers are busy. And there are millions of charities, and you have to stand out. So what does Room to Read stand for? Our 6 words: world change starts with educated children. We believe that if you want to change the world, there is no better place to start than in the most basic, fundamental way of looking at 4-year-olds and 5-year-olds and saying, let's get those 4-year-olds and 5-year-olds into school. Let's get them in front of good teachers. Let's get them access to libraries, bilingual libraries, and help them start that journey to education. In the world today, there are 800 million people who are illiterate. 800 million people. Mao Zedong said that 1 death is a tragedy and 1 million deaths is a statistic. And sometimes I feel that way about literacy. 1 illiterate child is impossible for me to comprehend that in this modern age we live in, that any child should have to grow up illiterate. 800 million people who are illiterate, that to me is just an absolute tragedy. I don't know how we can let that stand in this modern, wealthy world we live in. So for us at Room to Read, that's what drives us, changing the world through the power of education and thinking big about that. Education leads to self-empowerment. Education breaks the cycle of poverty. All of us can probably right now, if you think back 1, 2, 3, or 4 generations, you can probably identify one or several relatives who, for your own family, made that switch, made that break from poverty to middle class to perhaps upper class, from going through 7th grade to going through high school to going through college. And I'm sure many of you have gone to, MIT, Stanford, UW, there's probably 3 degrees per person in this room right now in terms of graduate degrees. And I think all of us can look back at a certain ancestor and know that they helped us to get to where we are today. My goal in the developing world, and Room to Read's goal in the developing world, is to do that same thing, so that in 1 or 2 generations, kids will look back and say, it was my mother who went through college on a or through high school on a Room to Read scholarship, or my father went to a Room to Read school in Vietnam, or my mother learned to read at a Room to Read library in South Africa. That's our goal. So, how we got started, how Room to Read got started. Kim referred to it briefly. In 1998, I decided to take a trek in Nepal. I had been working at Microsoft for about 7 years. I had recently resigned. I wanted to go find something new to do with my life. I didn't know what I was going to do. Microsoft, as it does, even though I'd resigned, they had already gotten me in the queue to do a consulting project when I got back from this trip. And so there's that strong gravitational force that keeps you attached to the mothership. And I said, I'm gone for at least 3 months. Africa, climbing Kilimanjaro, Nepal, India. I'm going to go away for a long time. The reason I went is that my friend Ben Grates, I don't know if anybody here knows Ben, but Ben and I were working together at Microsoft Australia at the time. And he said, we have to go to this slideshow. They're doing a slideshow tonight in downtown Sydney, adventure travel company, Nepal, Annapurna Circuit. How many of you have been to Nepal? Okay, you guys need to get out more. Come on, you got vacation? Great place. We went to this slideshow, and I learned about this incredible place called the Annapurna Circuit. It is an 18-day trek. It is a circumnavigation of 6 27,000-foot peaks. And you walk for 200 miles without seeing a car, without seeing a television. And there's this amazing place called the Throng Law Pass, an 18,000-foot pass, an old Tibetan trading route. And it's about as high as you can get in life, without, I don't know, being on an airplane. I mean, you're walking for days on end. And it's not technical, so if you're not like, Greg Bershears or one of those guys who climbs mountains technically, but you still want to get high, the Annapurna Circuit is a great place to do it. I wanted to go basically because after 7 years at Microsoft, I just needed to escape. I wanted to escape from conference calls. I wanted to escape from endless emails. I wanted to escape from the dreaded Monday morning management team meeting. And most importantly, I wanted to escape from certain... Yes, it's the Balmer effect in my slideshow. I was having these nightmares. We had just finished mid-year review. And I was having these nightmares, and in my nightmares, there was Steve's big, bald head. And he was going, "You don't know your numbers." You guys aren't even laughing at that. You've all experienced that. And, Ben and I were talking over, Mongolian hot pot and a couple of beers later on, and I said, if you go high enough in the Himalayas, you can probably escape the sound of Steve's voice. So that sounds like a great idea. Let's try it. So I decided to head off to Nepal. Now, Nepal, as those of you who have been there, Steve will return later in the presentation, okay? So stay tuned. Nepal is one of the world's poorest countries. People are living on $1 a day. Illiteracy is 70%. Can you imagine if you divided this room right here, and all these people are literate and all these people are illiterate? That's, unfortunately, the lottery of life in much of the developing world. Kids just don't have access to schools or education. It's something we take for granted in this country, but a lot of people in the developing world would just, love to have the opportunities that a lot of people in the developed world take for granted. I knew none of that going to Nepal. I was not going there as, the guy who wanted to try to, save children. I was going as a guy who just wanted a vacation and go trekking. But what happened to me is that I met a man on the side of the trail one day. I was drinking tea, and a man named Pasupati Neopani was the district resource person for the education department for Lamjung province. What that meant is that he walked hours upon hours upon hours on donkey trails from school to school to help them figure out what they needed. The irony of his job was that he said, I'm a district resource person and I have no resources. So all he would do is go to these schools and hear about their needs, and he'd kind of nod knowingly, and he'd be like, he had very little he could do. He had very little budget. He did, however, have an uncanny ability to talk susceptible trekkers like myself into going and seeing the school and to see if we could do something to help. So I eagerly signed up to go check out this school in a little village called Bahundanda. Between us and Bahundanda were 2 hours of donkey trails and some really scary bridges that had to be crossed. And on this particular bridge here, the biggest problem we had was actually I tried to cross it, and then Pasupati yelled at me because there was actually a donkey train coming across the bridge. And I don't know if you guys know this. If you've watched enough Animal Planet, you will know. What do donkeys lack? A reverse gear. So if you're in Nepal That would have been a funnier joke if, like, the crocodile accent guy had told it, right? Ah, mate. So, anyway, at the end of this bridge, there is this amazing little school. School hasn't started yet, but the kids are kind of coming into the courtyard. And it is just this dilapidated collection of mud walls, mud and straw, sheet metal roof that leaks during the rainy season, a dirt floor that turns to mud. They don't have school during the monsoon season, and they have 450 students. And again, I wondered, oh my gosh, how can we live in a world where we have so much and yet something as basic is lacking? The headmaster invited me to come see the school's library. Love being back on the Free Talking Rain bandwagon, by the way. Running an NGO, you drink tap water. I walk back in here, I've got like 2 cans of this stuff here. Got another one in reserve over here. Got the taxi queuing up to get some more out. No. So the school headmaster invited me to see his library. And how many of you were library nerds as kids? Oh, come on, we're in the research building. More than that. Okay, some of you were. I was a library nerd as a kid. School library, village library, you name it, I was there, maxing out the card, negotiating a special dispensation to go over the weekly limit of 10 books. I just loved reading as a kid. And so when the headmaster invited me to see the school's library, this is what I imagined. This is what I envisioned. I thought there would be a bunch of kids happily reading books. That's what a library is all about. Now, in reality, this library was just an empty room. There was a sign above the door that said library, and when you walk in, it was like Alice in Wonderland. There was nothing that would be, you know, part of a normal library. No desks, no chairs, no shelves, most importantly, no books. And I didn't want to be obnoxious, but I did have to ask, where exactly are your books? And the headmaster pointed to a cabinet in the back of the room with a rusty padlock on it. And he said, the books are precious. They are very scarce. We cannot let the children harm them. And he called for the teacher who had the key. And when they opened up the cabinet, the sad thing was, there were 2 very sad things. One is they only had 20 books. 450 kids, 20 books, something's wrong. Bigger problem, quality of the books. The books were literally backpacker cast-offs. They were things that trekkers had sympathetically said, oh, I'll try to help you here. Have my Gunter Grass, you know, the tin drum, or, you know, somebody had thoughtfully donated a couple of Danielle Steele romance novels. And I'm no literary snob. I think, you know, she's a fine writer. But, you know, if you're 4 or 5 years old, 6 years old, growing up in Nepal, and there's, you know, some Buddhist being ripped off on the cover of the book, that was probably not appropriate. So I wanted to help, but I didn't want to be obnoxious and ask, because you don't want to try to be like the great American savior, you know, over there. And thankfully, the headmaster stopped me from having to ask. Chapter 1 of my book, which is available on sale on the back of the room, Chapter 1 of my book is titled, Perhaps, Sir, You Will Someday Come Back with Books. That was his simple statement. It was not a question. It was not a request. It was just a statement. And there was a certain Zen-like purity to that statement that I thought about for the next 16 days as I circumnavigated the Annapurna circuit. And in my own mind, I had this vision of being like the Andrew Carnegie of Bahundanda, Nepal. Right? I didn't have Carnegie's resources. Carnegie did, who knows, how many libraries? A little higher. 2,000. Is that 2 or 2,000? 3,000. 2,900 libraries. Leave it to a CFO to know his numbers. Carnegie did 2,900 libraries. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to do 1. But the concept was the same, right? Carnegie's libraries are paying dividends for generations. There are now nearly 3,000 of them. He's been dead for 3 generations, yet each and every day millions of people walk into a Carnegie-financed public library. Number 1 busiest library in America. Who knows where it is? Queens. Queens, New York. Why Queens? Immigrant population. Huge, huge, huge immigrant population. What's one of the first things that a new immigrant to America does? They get their kids, they walk into the library, they show them how the library works, and they say, read. Learn English. Read. That's their version of the American dream. How much harder would the American dream be for those families if they didn't have a public library, especially for immigrants who are working back-breaking hours for low pay? So, libraries, I think, are incredibly important, and I think they will always be important. No matter how high-tech we get, I think books are always going to have a special resonance for kids, for adults, for everybody. So in my own mind, I fantasized about returning one day to this village and surprising the headmaster with a large donation of books. I thought 450 kids, let's come back with 450 books. I went to Kathmandu and went to my Hotmail address book, and I had 120 friends around the world in my Hotmail address book. And so I decided I'd do a book drive. And first I had to have a collection point because I was living overseas. So I asked my parents if they would be the collection point in North America. And my parents, who are here today, they're in the next to back row. Wave hello to my parents. There's... Tomorrow is their 51st wedding anniversary. But enough about them. Back to me. So my parents and I chatted over email, and I said, I'm going to do this book drive. Can you help? Can you be the collection point in North America? Oh, how many books do you think you'll get? Oh, 100, 200 tops, maybe 250. No problem. Tiny little project. No time involvement on your part. Bingo. They fell for it. You guys know Microsoft people. Most of the people on my distribution list were Microsoft people. They know how to get shit done. Am I allowed to swear on this webcast? Excellent. Good. Thank you. So we got 3,000 books the first month. And along with the books, people were giving us $100 bills to pay for the shipping the books over. People were writing us notes saying, I've been in the developing world, I've seen the poverty, and what you're doing is what's needed. It is a hand up, not a handout. Education is the great equalizer. It's not giving money away, it's giving kids the ability to help themselves through the power of education. So we decided to go back, we being my dad and I. My dad decided he wanted to go back to Nepal with me, which my mother thought was a fantastic idea for my dad and I to go to Nepal for several weeks. He had recently retired, and I don't know if you guys know much about American men, but American guys, get a hobby, okay? When you retire, it's very important to have that hobby. So my dad and I decided to go over to Nepal together. And in my own mind, I had this fantasy that when I went back to Nepal to deliver these books, we would have a yak. I really wanted to have the yak-mobile. How many of you had a bookmobile in your town? Yeah, right. Yeah, it's kind of cool, right? But wouldn't it have been even cooler if they delivered the books on a yak? And this photo, we'll return to this photo later. I'll tell you the true story. But what happened is we were at a lower elevation, and they didn't actually have yaks. Yaks cannot survive below about 10,000 feet. So we had to settle for donkeys. It's still kind of cool, you know, the donkey train. We had 8 donkeys, and we went off to the villages to deliver these books. And this is the reaction we got from the kids. They had never seen brightly colored children's books before. Their only encounter with books had been these, heavy text-intensive, black and white, photo-free, government-issued textbooks on thin rice paper, and they have 3 kids to a textbook. And when they saw pictures of African wildlife, when they saw sharks, when they saw the solar system, the moon, I had a little boy who didn't know that man had walked on the moon. And we had to explain to him he had this moonwalk book. Not the Michael Jackson moonwalk, but the actual Neil Armstrong moonwalk. And to me, it just felt incredible to be bringing this gift to these children, to be able to give them an opportunity they would have never otherwise had. And the good thing is we got to make several school visits. So every day that I was on this trip, I got closer and closer to kind of not hitting an epiphany, but kind of hitting a little mini epiphany, and thinking to myself that there may be, for me, life after Microsoft. And the after part may come earlier than I thought it would come, because it was almost impossible for me emotionally at that point to leave Nepal. I knew I had to physically leave it, to go back to my desk, but I knew that emotionally something had caught on with me, and I thought, all of us have been very fortunate. All of us have had a good education. All of us have a well-paying job, and I thought to myself, this is maybe something that I can do that's going to be a little bit different, and it's going to be a radical shift. But I left in 1999 to start this charity, and I thought, if we've done this at 10 schools, maybe we can do it at 100, and then maybe 1,000, and then maybe 10,000, and keep building, building, building. So that's how kind of Room to Read got started. And part 1 of the book, I've not given away much of it. I've given away the first 35 pages. Sorry about that. But that's how Room to Read got started. Now, a number of you in the room have been very, very supportive. So the first thing I did when I started it, when they asked Willie Loman or Willie Sutton, why do you rob banks? And he goes, that's where the money is. So I immediately came back to Redmond and told all my friends about what I wanted to do. And a number of you in the audience, I just want to point out a couple projects that have been done over the course of the last 7 years. And I'm going to talk more about kind of Room to Read's business model. A number of you in the room have actually supported the construction of schools. We can build a school in the developing world for somewhere in the range of $10,000 to $16,000. And the reason we can build it that cheaply is because we require the local community to co-invest with us. We don't give them everything we need. We give them maybe half, maybe three-quarters. We've gone as high as 85% in the poorest of the poor villages. But we keep our costs low because the local people donate land, donate labor, donate small amounts of money. So rather than having it be kind of a World Bank type project where you come in with your bulldozers and your billions of dollars and your foreign work crews and you say, hello, Village X, we're here to build a school for you or a hospital for you, we send local employees to the village to say, we'd love to help you build a school or library, but we'll only help you if you can help yourself. And so a number of teams here at Microsoft have rallied, and they've used the giving campaign as a way to get their work group to all put money in to a common pool. Everybody checks off Room to Read, and at the end they kind of figure out what they've raised. And so Jordan Schwartz has done this 4 years in a row with his team. Rosemary Fitzsimons has done it with her team. A number of you I know have contributed to those programs, so thank you. What the teams are doing is at the end of the giving campaign, they're all estimating what they donated to Room to Read, what the Microsoft match is, and then they call me and say, okay, we've raised $30,000. What can we do? We say, how about building a school in Vietnam and then building a school in Laos? You can do both those things for $30,000. And it's a great way to bring the group together because it then rallies that team around a common goal. And they get a progress report from Room to Read. They get a completion report when the school is completed. And they get photos. And if they want to go visit, they can go visit the school. So it's a very nice way to bring a team together. And a number of you in the audience have supported that. So thank you. Because when you're starting from scratch without the budget of a Warren Buffett or a Bill Gates or a Paul Allen, you need all the support you can get. So those are a couple of the projects. Craig Bruya, who's here, who's the CFO of the, what's the exact name of the division now? Microsoft MBS, Microsoft Business Solutions. Craig has rallied friends, has himself dedicated schools, local language books, other things. So the capital goes a long way. This is a shot taken from one of our donor trips. We've set things up so that people can go visit their schools. And this is a kindergarten we opened in Vietnam. This is actually the team that Jordan and Rosemary rallied, a kindergarten in Vietnam that opened in the Mekong Delta 2 years ago. This next shot is from another donor trip, one of my favorites. This is actually teaching the kids how to do the hokey pokey. And these are some of our donors who had actually worked to endow the school in Vietnam. Local language publishing is something else that people at Microsoft have supported. The reason this program is important is because in much of the developing world, children lack access to books in their own language. In the developing world, the parents are usually too poor to afford books, and so publishers don't see a business case, so they don't publish. And it's a problem as old as the Himalayas. I mean, if you want your child to gain literacy, the best thing you can do is give them books in their local language. And then later they can learn English, and then later they can learn computers. But I think we're putting the cart before the horse if we think that kids are going to get in front of a computer and learn that before they've even learned to read in their own language. And we certainly are putting the cart before the horse if we think kids are going to read English first before learning to read in their own language. So this local language publishing program is very important for us. Room to Read wants to be the Andrew Carnegie of the developing world by putting libraries everywhere where kids lack access to books. We also, because we're ambitious, want to also be the Dr. Seuss of the developing world and actually create local content in the local languages. So this book, Kameli Kobasna, is written by a Nepali artist to whom we paid, written by a Nepali writer to whom we paid $300, illustrated by a Nepali artist to whom we paid $300, edited by a Nepali editor to whom we paid $200, and we printed 10,000 copies of this book, all locally, to help jumpstart the children's book industry. All in cost, $10,000 for 10,000 books. $1 a book, that's all it takes to be the Dr. Seuss of the developing world. So that, again, is very much of a Microsoftism, right? All these people told us, you guys won't be able to publish local language books. You don't have the competency to do that. You don't have the experience. And we just said, yeah, whatever, thanks. Thanks for telling us why it won't work. And we went off and we did it. And to date, we've published over 75 new local language titles. We have 70 more that we're doing this year. We're publishing in Khmer, Vietnamese, Nepali, Hindi, Sinhala, Tamil, Lao, Nepali. I think I might have repeated one of those. And we are spearheading a project in Africa now to print in the South African languages and also in both Amharic and Sidoma languages in Ethiopia. So we're trying to do whatever we can to get kids access to books that are culturally relevant. This book is called Kameliko Boston. It's a story about a Nepali girl who becomes obsessed with her mother's jewelry. And every day she wears her mother's jewelry to school, and she makes the kids draw photos or draw pictures of her, and aren't I beautiful, and she neglects her studies and gets failing grades and gets threatened with expulsion from school. And when I first saw this book, my immediate reaction was that I grabbed a FedEx envelope and sent a copy to my girlfriend, because I thought there were valuable lessons to be learned. So if you are the parent of a young daughter, I'm willing to sell you a copy of this book. Give me $1,000, and I guarantee you a good return on investment on this book. We can actually give you copies of the book for free. I did have a father last night in Friday Harbor. He came up to me and he goes, I do have a 5-year-old daughter, and I do want a copy of that book. So another one of our local language books, The Lost Baby Elephant. This is a Khmer book that is about an elephant who gets lost in the jungle, can't find its mother, and finds a young Cambodian boy named Sok who helps him to navigate through the jungle. And they learn about plant life and animals and things like that. But one of our goals is to get as many of these books into the hands of kids as possible and let them learn from a young age in their own language. Other projects endowed by people at Microsoft, again, the Giving Campaign last year, Jordan's group that he rallied and Rosemarie's group that she rallied, actually endowed 10 of our first libraries in Laos. Laos is a very poor landlocked country in Asia. More ordnance was dropped on Laos during the Vietnam War by the Americans than was dropped on Germany and Japan combined during all of World War II. Ain't progress wonderful? We managed to basically leave most of that unexploded ordnance behind, and Laos is now trying to rebuild on a very, very small budget. But there's optimism. Education is an optimistic thing. Putting Lao language books in the hands of kids is an optimistic thing. So I want to say thank you to everybody from Microsoft who has supported us through the Giving Campaign, through attending our events, and helping us to get things off the ground. Another project done last year, Barbara Gordon ran the Reykjavik Marathon. Because it's not hard enough to run a marathon, you got to run a marathon in Iceland during a rainstorm. But their group rallied to endow a computer lab in Cambodia. And this, to me, was very, very hopeful, because in Cambodia, you had the Khmer Rouge burn down the majority of the schools and kill the majority of the teachers during the genocide there. And on $96 million a year, the Cambodian government is trying to rebuild their education system literally from ground zero. It's less than what Stanford spends on their football team in a year. I hope you guys like that anti-Pac-10 dig if you're Washington alums. I'm sure Washington probably spends that too. So we're trying to do whatever we can to help the Cambodian kids have a brighter future through education. At one of our labs, a little boy came up to our team and gave them this little drawing he had made. And in it, he is at his desk, and he is dreaming. He's got his notebook in front of him and his pen, and he's dreaming about one day growing up to, I don't know, I guess be a hedge fund manager, judging by a suit and tie. But this child talks about his dream of being a businessman one day. And to me, that was the perfect antidote to the Khmer Rouge. That in the world, there's a lot of destruction, there's a lot of negative forces, a lot of negative energy. And I think all we can do is build and say, okay, if something negative happens, we've got to make something positive happen. And so a lot of what we're trying to do with education in the developing world is give these kids a brighter future and hopefully the prospect of a happy adulthood. So each project we do, just a quick, kind of business aspect of what we're trying to do is to create a quid pro quo, that if somebody does endow a school through Room to Read or a computer lab or a language lab, we actually give them a dedication plaque. So you can actually dedicate a school to a loved one, a computer room, whatever you want, to a loved one, and make it an anniversary gift, make it a birthday gift, make it a wedding gift, whatever it is. We have had the most amazing stories of people who've gone out of their way to help us. One couple from New York called me one day and said, we need to talk to you when you have 10 minutes. I said, great, let's go right now. And so we've made a very important decision. We've decided that we're not going to buy an engagement ring. We're instead going to endow a school in Nepal. And I hung up, and I called my team around me, and I told them this news, and I expected it to be a very emotional moment, except that every female member of my staff said, no way, man, really? But we've had just the most incredible support. We had a second grader in Tennessee, Nepali-American girl, saw me on National Geographic talking about the lack of schools in Nepal, and she started crying. And in my book, I talk about this girl. Her name was Kripali. And she said, her parents said, why are you crying? Well, because little girls in Nepal don't get to go to school, and I do. And her parents said, well, don't cry. Do something about it. And they convinced her to do a readathon. And she went all around the neighborhood, and everybody pledged, whatever many cents or dollars per book that she read. And within 3 months, she had read so many books that she actually had enough money to endow a school in Nepal. That's a second grader. And a year later, we got an email from her father saying, we want to talk to you again because Kripauli wants to do a second project. And she wants to do a school every year. So she's now in 3rd grade. And so she was going to go to the Nepali American annual meeting where they all get together on Memorial Day weekend and do a raffle. And she was going to businesses. And how can you refuse a little 3rd grade girl going to your business saying, may I have a DVD player, please, for free? May I have a microwave oven, please, for free? She literally collected all these different items. And then her parents said, you have to go on stage in front of 3,000 people to sell your raffle tickets. And she said, oh, no, she was afraid, she was shy. And her parents said, well, we're going to have John call you. She's like, really? So her parents called me, and they're like, well, you're Kripali's hero. And I was really nervous calling her. It's like when a little 3rd grade girl thinks you're her hero, you don't want to screw the call up. And I literally, I had my briefing notes. It's like getting ready for a meeting with Ballmer. It's like I had like my hello, Kripali, how's the weather in Tennessee today? A little small talk, and then, move in. And I said, I understand you're going to go on stage. And she said, no, I'm scared. I won't go on stage. And so I took a deep breath, and I said, suck it up, kid. Life's tough. I did not really say that. You guys are all... I told her if she went on stage, I'd buy 50 tickets. She said yes. She went on stage. She sold her tickets. She endowed a second project in Nepal. So the book is full of all kinds of wonderful stories. I think of them as everyday heroes. I don't think everybody is going to, leave Microsoft to change the world, or leave Google to change the world, or leave wherever to change the world. What I want to do is send people the message from this book that you don't have to be as rich as Warren Buffett or Paul Allen to go change the world. You don't have to be as good looking as Angelina Jolie or Brad Pitt to go help kids in Africa. It's in anybody's capability to do so. And what we're trying to do in the book is to get that knowledge out there, that it doesn't take a lot of money. It doesn't take a lot of effort. A little money goes so far in the developing world. So what I want to close with, and I'm going to leave time for Q&A, and if you have to leave early, we've actually pre-signed some books. So if you do have to leave early but you still want a signed copy of the book, they are available at the back table. But what I want to do is close by talking about taking the principles I learned at Microsoft and applying them to the NGO sector. At Room to Read, we say that we want to run our organization with the compassion of Mother Teresa, but the focus and tenacity of a blue-chip company. So take the best of both worlds. I think in too much of the charity world, there's very incremental, very small thinking. And I think with the problems in the world today, as intractable and as large as they are, we need Ballmer-type thinking in the charity world. And so what I want to do in my last 10 minutes is to give you, what if Steve Ballmer ran a charity? Or what if you'd learned under Steve Ballmer? So he's back! These are my Ballmerisms that I've applied to Room to Read. First and foremost, go big or go home. That was always something I was taught. When I joined the Microsoft Office group under Robbie Bach, and we had like 7% market share in word processing and 8% market share in spreadsheets, and Robbie stood up in 1994 and he said, Office is going to have 90% market share within 2 years. Everybody in the room was like, no way, no way. And literally, there was like outright hostility and skepticism to this number. And these were not Wall Street analysts. These were his team members. But he literally had this go big or go home mentality. And guess what happened? Who uses WordPerfect these days? Is this being subpoenaed by the DOJ? So go big or go home. What we're trying to do at Room to Read, we have our own big, hairy, audacious goal. How many people read Jim Collins' Good to Great? Great. I mean, they talk about, it's either there or Built to Last. They talk about big, hairy, audacious goals. At Room to Read, our goal is to help at least 10 million children to gain the lifelong gift of education. We don't want to think small about this. There are so many people in the world today who are illiterate, and the other scary statistic I'll give you is that 2/3 of the people who are illiterate are women. And that is a self-perpetuating problem, because if you don't educate the women, you don't educate the next generation. So we are trying very, very hard to think big about educating as many children as possible and using the mantra of go big or go home. Second one, know your numbers. This is something I always heard. I remember Craig in myself and a whole traveling circus of people were going through Malaysia and Singapore and Australia and New Zealand, and I kept hearing, know your numbers, know your numbers. So at Room to Read, what we try to do is we try to be very, very data-driven, and we try to give people numbers because numbers are memorable. Anecdotes are memorable, but so are numbers. So here are some of our numbers. $2,000 is what it cost us to establish the average school library. It is not a lot of money. For $2,000, we can set up a school library, fill it with English language books that are donated by publishers, fill it with local language books we self-publish, train the librarian, do ongoing monitoring and evaluation, come back every year for the next 3 years and resupply the books, and do top-up library training for $2,000. That's one of our numbers. We throw that out because we want that to be memorable. We're hoping that the next time you're at your church, your book club, your family holiday, and you're trying to think, what can you do to make the world a better place? We want you to memorize these numbers. Secondly, I mentioned the problem of girls in the developing world not having access to education. It is laughably inexpensive to put a girl in the developing world in school. $250 a year. Puts a girl in school, keeps her in school, gives her a mentor, gives her everything she needs. School uniform, shoes, book bag, you name it, we supply it. $2,500 will actually supply 10 years of a girl's education, the entire education, the entire arc of education, and then every subsequent generation is affected by that. Last night in Friday Harbor, we had 7 people in the audience come up afterwards and give us a business card, and on the back of it they wrote one 10-year scholarship. They sponsored a 10-year scholarship. It was 7 lives changed right there, and if each woman is going to have 2 or 3 children, and then each of them has 2 or 3 grandchildren, think about the effect that has in the world. What we do at Room to Read is not the least bit glamorous or sexy. We are not doing $100 lime green laptops that somehow, I guess, are going to connect to the internet someday. We are doing the inexpensive, unglorious stuff, but it's the fundamental stuff you have to do. If there's a girl in the developing world who is 4 years old who is being told you don't get to go to school, that is just plain wrong. I do not think we can let that stand. So the goal for our Girls Scholarship Program is to make it the largest scholarship program in the history of the world. Full stop. We can do it. A Rhodes Scholarship costs $25,000 a year to endow. For 1% of that, we can endow a scholarship for a girl in the developing world. And then finally, I mentioned all the people who have endowed schools. It's not difficult to endow a school because so many people in the community are willing to invest time, invest labor. I've seen mothers carrying 100-pound bags of cement 2 hours up a steep mountainside before sunrise as their contribution of labor to the Room to Read Challenge grant, because those mothers want their kids to go to school. So, again, a nice way to change the world. Third bomb. Are you guys enjoying the bomberisms? Or do you get enough of them during the day and you thought you were going to come in here and escape? Results. In my book, there's actually a chapter it's not titled the Bomber chapter, but it's kind of like the Bomber chapter. I think it's titled, Building the Microsoft in a Nonprofit World. And I talk about how Steve, always lived, ate, slept, breathed, results, results, results. When I formed Room to Read, I made a decision. I decided we would report our results to our investors on a quarterly basis, much like a blue chip company does. Every public company has to report its results on a quarterly basis, sales, revenues, earnings per share, etc. In the charity world, that doesn't really happen. A lot of organizations hide behind good intentions. We're trying hard, we're doing well, we're just not growing very fast. We don't want that. We want to actually publish our results and be very open about it. In the bottom of our emails, every staff member has a little kind of ticker symbol as a signature file. Thank you, Microsoft Outlook. And literally, it lists out number of schools, number of libraries, number of books. We've been around for about 6.5 years now, and these are our results. I'm very proud of the team for having delivered these results. First and foremost, we've endowed 210 schools. 6 of those have been endowed by groups at Microsoft. We're endowing 80 schools this year, so we'll be near 300 by the end of this year. We're hoping to do 100 in 2007. 2006 program is sold out, thankfully, because so many people want to endow schools. 2007 program now taking reservations. So we're very excited about the growth in this program. We've put over 2,000 girls on long-term scholarship. We will be at 2,300 by the end of October when the new school year starts in Cambodia and Vietnam. And we hope to scale this program up absolutely massively. There's no shortage. There's over 500 million women in the developing world who lack literacy. So there's no limit as to how big this program can grow. We've put 2 million books into the hands of kids. If you think about the power of putting one book in the hand of one child that is a very powerful thing. Think about the power of putting 2 million books into the hands of children. That's the scale we've reached. Now, as this program, the local language program, grows, this number could skyrocket. Because in the beginning, we relied on donations of books from individuals and publishers. And that doesn't scale. Because unless the publisher is making major mistakes, you don't get a lot of donations. Once you control the printing presses, it's no problem to go to 10 million, 20 million, 30 million, 50 million books. And I'll pass this around. There's some more actually in the back. Stephanie Scott, who's my coworker from San Francisco, is in the back. There she is in the red, waving. She has more of these books. So if you have kids and you want to take a bilingual book home, feel free to drop it at the table. We're happy to give you one. And then finally, the idea behind Room to Read is to do one library in this village called Bahundanda. In true Microsoft fashion, we have slightly overachieved on that goal, and we've now set up 3,000 bilingual reading rooms. We call them reading rooms across the developing world. This year, on average, we open 18 new libraries per week. That's 2.5 libraries per day. Every single week, we reach nearly 5,000 children with our first library. So again, results, results, results. That's the scale we're reaching. When we got close to opening our 3,000th library, we realized two things. Number one, we were actually hitting a Carnegie-sized number. You remember Carnegie did 2,900 libraries. Game over, Andrew Carnegie. We're ahead of you. Full disclosure, Carnegie's libraries were really big, and there's Roman columns, and there's stone lions out front. Our libraries are cheap and cheerful. They're not expensive, but the concept is the same. Give every child access to books. No child should have to lack access to something as fundamental as books because of something like gender inequality or economic inequality or whatever it might be. And the thing is about Carnegie is that, Carnegie has been criticized by academics. The great thing about academics is they can always find something to criticize. There's never any loss of kind of, how to do better. And when you read what academics say about Carnegie, the number one criticism is he didn't actually put books in the libraries. He endowed the hardware, but he didn't endow the software. And so what we're trying to do is atone for that mistake or learn from that mistake by having our local language publishing program. And so ideally, the average library that we have right now has about 600 books in it. And my goal is as we crank the printing presses and find more and more authors and artists and become even more of the Dr. Seuss of the developing world, we will have thousands of books. Because every kid, you put a kid in front of books, they read them like no tomorrow. So we have to keep printing out more and more books. In total, almost 1 million kids now have access to Room to Read's libraries and schools. About 990,000 is what we estimate. Kids now can actually walk into a Room to Read library or school each and every day. So we're about 10% of the way to our goal of helping 10 million kids. We have a long ways to go, but we're very hardworking, we're very focused, we're very ambitious, and I plan to do this with the rest of my life. So we got, God willing, 3 to 4 more decades to keep scaling things up. Another Ballmerism, is go for growth. I don't know about what groups you work in, but when I worked here, if there was like a potential market, we just went after it. If there was a competitor who had large market share, I remember working on the browser team in Australia in 1997, and Netscape was making noises about reducing Windows to a slightly buggy set of device drivers, and they were going to take over, and we were like, no way, man, we're moving into that space. We're taking that space. Similarly, I don't want to be like a hard-punching, George Foreman of the NGO world and go wipe anybody out. It's not that kind of growth. What I'm trying to do is try to fill a market gap. I see a huge market gap in the world today because there's just not enough being done in education. We decided to look at how fast we were scaling. Were we scaling fast enough? Could we be proud of our growth? And we tried to look at organizations that were doing massive amounts of libraries and schools, and we couldn't actually find any good benchmark data that was relevant. We were growing at a faster rate. And we decided we'd benchmark ourselves against a public company. We asked ourselves, who is opening new outlets at a rapid rate that we can benchmark ourselves against? Yes, very good, Starbucks. So we went and we looked at the publicly available data to find out how fast did Starbucks open outlets each and every year after their initial public offering when Wall Street pressured them to grow. We decided to compare those outlet numbers to Room to Read's number of new libraries. And were we growing as fast as a public company would grow? Starbucks saw opportunity. The world is full of kind of tepid dishwater-colored coffee. Let's go out and get everybody, hooked on $3 lattes. And we thought, okay, well, the world needs literature as much as it needs lattes. So we benchmarked ourselves. And this is, kind of a classic Microsoft mid-year review type growth chart. We looked at Starbucks. They're in the yellow. That's the number of new outlets each and every year after their IPO. And Room to Read New Libraries is in the green. And the first couple of years, they're kicking our butt. And by year 3, we're kind of starting to pull even. And by year 4, we're ahead of them. By year 6, we're opening outlets at double the rate of Starbucks in their 6th year. So, thanks, Mom. Thanks, Dad, for getting that clapping started. Wasn't really my mom and dad who did that. So, every time you see a new Starbucks open somewhere, and you will see them opening, even in Seattle, they're still opening new outlets. Every time you see a new Starbucks open, think to yourself, two Room to Read reading rooms. That's what we hope to be doing. Another thing at Microsoft we always said is if you see a good person, hire them. And I want to talk a bit about my team just very briefly because I get all the glory. I get to go on book tour and talk about Room to Read and talk about our growth. But it's not me. It's the team. The team are really the unsung heroes of Room to Read. They're the ones who are out riding the rickety buses for 16 hours to rural villages, taking their motorbikes down rutted dirt roads to visit girls whose families need scholarships. And everywhere that we work with local employees. We don't send American expats overseas to run things. We really, as much as we can, don't even use volunteer labor overseas. A lot of times people contact us and say, can I go volunteer for 3 months and teach? And we have to say no. Because what we want to do is build indigenous capacity. You can't educate a child over the course of a 10-year education if you rely on people coming in and going and coming in and going and flying back and forth. When their vacation's over, they leave. You have to build the local capacity so it's there 7/24. The people doing that are our local teams. This is our team in Vietnam, led by a wonderful woman third from the left named Thuy. This is our team in Nepal, led by Dinesh Shrestha, who is somebody my father actually found over the internet via the Kathmandu Lions Club. Who knew Kathmandu had a Lions Club? But they helped us with our initial book donation project, and we eventually hired Dinesh away from the World Health Organization to run Room to Read Nepal. So everywhere we work, we have these very strong, very entrepreneurial local teams who are empowered to make all decisions. I sometimes will go to a school site, and the headmaster will come up to me and petition me for something. And I have to say, have you met Dinesh? Have you met Mr. Bormi? Have you met Ms. Sunisha? Oh, yes, I know them. I say, great, you have to ask them. I don't speak Nepali. I don't speak Hindi. I don't know the local conditions. It's up to Dinesh, to Sunisha, to Suba to make those decisions. So that's a very important part of our model, is really having the respect for the local people, to hire them, let them make all decisions. And then those people go off and they challenge the village residents to say, okay, we need you to donate land, labor, and money to these projects. So it really is very much bottoms-up, grassroots as it gets. But we want to do that bottoms-up grassroots, but do it on a big, big, big scale. Keeping our expenses low is something else. How many of you have ever had to just like fight to get something approved here, expense-wise? Yeah. We're doing that same thing at Room to Read. We're trying to keep our overhead expenses as low as possible. If it's a program expense, we'll invest in it till the cows come home. If it's library training, great, invest. Local language publishing, great, invest. Great people on the ground that run your programs, invest. But when it comes to fundraising, when it comes to administrative expenses, we want to keep those as low as possible. Life to date, we've kept our overhead expenses below 10% of our total expenses. So 90 cents in the dollar is going directly to the programs, not to the overhead. That's why I'm stealing all your talking rain. This would have cost me $1 at the 7-Eleven on 51st Street. This is our quintessential low overhead photo. This is our team in Cambodia setting up a new rural library using rented motorbikes and local drivers. What's missing from this photo? Helmets. A very safety-conscious Volvo driving father in the front row says helmets. Yes, helmets are missing. What else is missing?
Asphalt. Sorry.
It's all right, you're on a roll. SUVs. Who said that? Excellent. SUVs. You are the proud winner of the official Leaving Microsoft to Change the World book tour stuffed yak. These were made in Nepal. If you listen carefully, can you hear that little yak bell? Good answer. That cost me $1, and that is considered an overhead expense. No, there are no Land Rovers in this photo. No Land Rovers were purchased to set up this rural library. if you go, and I will not name names, but if you go to the watering hole in Phnom Penh or Saigon or Kathmandu on a Friday afternoon where all the aid workers go at the end of a long week, you literally are like, slaloming through Land Rovers and Range Rovers, and you're like, there's $75,000, there's $75,000, there's $75,000. We did not spend on a Land Rover. We can put that money directly into the programs. So that to me is a very important thing, to keep our overhead expenses low and put the money where it's needed, into the programs. One other way we keep our overhead low, and for those of you who have another meeting, I'm going to be done in about 3 to 4 minutes, and then we'll go ahead and sign books. We have fundraising chapters around the world. We rely heavily on volunteers to raise our funds for us. The reason we do that is to keep our overhead low. We don't want to have 50 people on our fundraising team. We'd rather have 4, 5, 6, 7 people on our fundraising team, but then have thousands of volunteers around the world who have not quit their jobs, who may still work at Accenture or Microsoft or Goldman Sachs or Starbucks, but who donate their time. Last year, our fundraising chapters, and we have them everywhere in the world, we're trying to get them everywhere in the world where there's rich people. Seattle, Vancouver, Toronto, London, New York, Sydney, Hong Kong, Singapore, Paris, you name it, we have fundraising chapters in those places. Last year, volunteers raised $2.1 million, which is over 33% of our budget, raised by volunteers. This year, they're doubling down. They have vowed to raise $4 million. That is over 50% of our budget being raised by volunteers. And that's that spirit of activism that really permeates Room to Read. It is, again, not a top-heavy, top-down model. It is people being empowered to go off and say, I'm going to throw a party. We have a group in San Francisco who's throwing a party in November. They're going to raise $250,000 in one night. That's their goal. And they already have $100,000 of pre-commitment. So why $250,000? Because $250,000 at $250 per girl per scholarship year will fund 1,000 years of girls' scholarships. They're going to raise it in one night, and they're going to have fun doing it. So that, again, is the spirit of Room to Read. This next shot is, I hope he's watching the webcast from Hong Kong, is of Rob Hilton from Microsoft's Hong Kong sales office. This is a rather greedy-looking Rob Hilton, clutching $1,000 Hong Kong bills and $500 Hong Kong bills. This was our Hong Kong chapter, #1 fundraising chapter in the world. They raised $330,000 in their post-tsunami fundraiser in Hong Kong. And this was, again, just the spirit of Room to Read, these people having a great time. Final part is about the quota, making your numbers. Mr. Craig Bruyere would like to tell a brief story about how he taught me his favorite Balmerism.
Well, the first time, not the first time I met John, because I knew John when he was in Australia, but the first time that he tried to take money out of my pocket, I asked him what his annual budget was, and I don't remember how much it was at the time, but we had to divide it by 12 and then divide it by the 4 weeks, and I said, well, so that's your quota, right? And he hadn't really, kind of got that concept in his mind, but he has to raise that much money every day if that's his budget, because at the time he was the only fundraiser.
Well, quota was $10,000 per day back then.
10,000 back then.
Back then.
A lot bigger now. And so I've been following him ever since, and I've helped him make his quota, costing more money every year to help make his quota. But he does still call me up. So, and I've done, 3 schools now, I guess, and 2 books, and lots of scholarships.
Bunch of scholarships, yeah.
And I'm in for, he hasn't mentioned, but he's going to Africa next, and I'm in for helping him get started in Africa. I haven't sent you the check yet, but I'm good for it.
Okay. Well, and many of you may also know Frank Scott, who used to work here at Microsoft and had done the wonderful Humanitarian Relief Project. I had coffee with Frank yesterday. I told him about Craig's donation to Read South Africa. He's matching you. All right. And he's vowed. But he knew I was coming here, and he said, tell anybody there I'll match them dollar for dollar up to $10,000 if they give to Room to Read. So just keep that in mind. Got to make quota. Got to make quota. Finally, the final thing for me about my last and favorite Balmerism is creating a truly global organization. What Microsoft did in its first 25 years was absolutely unprecedented. To have scaled to be in 60 countries, to have captured such, large parts of diverse markets, be it the OS, the desktop, the Xbox, you name it. It's just incredible how quickly Microsoft grew to a global organization. My goal for Room to Read is to do the same thing. There is not right now a single trusted global brand for developing world education. There is not a single organization that has scaled throughout the developing world, Asia, Africa, and Latin America, that focuses solely on K through 12 education. And that, to me, is an absolutely glaring, huge market gap that any entrepreneur would kill to go after. And in my mind, I think we need to do it. I mean, if you look at the aid world today, so much of it is about Band-Aids. And Band-Aids are needed in the world, right? But you also have to take preventative measures. I think education is a great preventative measure. If you see on television tonight famine somewhere, and you respond, and you should respond, you can give money to Oxfam, to CARE, to UNICEF, to the UN World Food Program, you name it. There's organizations out there, and God bless them. They're doing great work. If you see a refugee crisis in the Balkans, or you're concerned about Darfur in the Sudan, there's the International Rescue Committee. There's Doctors Without Borders. There are groups doing fantastic work there, and God bless them because they're needed. If you want to prevent problems by getting kids into school from a young age, if you think gender inequality happens because of the fact that so many girls don't go to school, if you think that a child who grows up reading will become self-sufficient and solve their own problems, you want a trusted global brand to invest in. It doesn't currently exist. My goal for Room to Read, and I hope that many of you will join us in this goal, is to create that trusted global brand. With the launch of Room to Read in Africa this year, we're launching 4 new countries in Africa in the next 4 years. The launch of Room to Read in Latin America in 2008. We will grow from 7 countries today to 15 countries by the end of 2010. And at that point, we have reached a truly global scale. Go across the rich world, we will have Room to Read fundraising chapters everywhere in the rich world. So we are looking at a massive infusion of capital from the rich world to the developing world to build not 3,000 libraries, but hopefully 20,000. Not 210 schools, but hopefully 2,000. Not 2,000 girls on scholarship, hopefully 20,000 or 30,000 or 50,000. I think it's in our power to do it. All of us in our lives have built businesses that have scaled massively. I want to really build an NGO that scales equally massively. Now, you may be asking yourself at this point in the presentation, how can I help? You may, maybe you're not. I don't know. I was a product manager, you know. Marketing gets in the genes. I want to pitch you on helping us because I don't have a sugar daddy. We don't have an endowment. Many people say you must be getting funding from the Gates Foundation. We're not. Full stop. We're not getting funding from the Gates Foundation. Their developing world work is fantastic, but it's in healthcare, vaccines, things like that are needed. They're not funding international education initiatives. They're funding domestic education initiatives. So I can't go anywhere without asking for help. That's just the reality of the situation. When I left Microsoft, I didn't have tens of millions of dollars. I could spend my entire net worth, and it would only keep the car running for 3 months. So I rely on everything we do at Room to Read. I rely on people who are willing to help us out. So I'll ask your forgiveness, but in closing, I want to ask you to think about doing one of 3 things. First and foremost, help us to create buzz for this book. Please buy the book. Please buy multiple copies of the book. And please give the book to everyone you know who's going to donate to the giving campaign, who hasn't used their matching gift limit this year, who is looking for a life change, who may know somebody who's looking for a life change, who knows somebody who's about to retire. Anything you can do. If this book gets into the right hands, every single person who reads this book is capable of writing me an email and saying, John, I want to endow a scholarship, a book, a library, a school. So please, 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 we got plenty of books in the back. I will sign books till my hand hurts. I will customize the book. Please get the book into the hands of people you know. Secondly, think about endowing a project. I've talked about this. I'm not going to talk about it anymore right now, but if you're interested in endowing a project or getting your group to endow a project, Stephanie's in the back. We have my business cards. I'm simply john@roomtoread.org, and I've got cards here. Would love to talk to you about endowing a local language book or a computer lab, or whatever it might be, if you can rally your team. Third is to wave the flag for Room to Read on the giving campaign. Please talk to your coworkers and say, hey, I've got an idea. If each of us pledges $20 per pay period and Microsoft matches it and we get X number of people, we can endow one girl's scholarship. Easy. We think bigger, we can endow some libraries. We think bigger, we can endow a computer lab or a school. Please think about doing that, because you can harness the energy. We can tell you exactly how Jordan and Rosemarie and others have done it, so we can actually give you the blueprint for how to do it and know what your team's contributed. And you can come to us with your shopping list and say, we've raised $25,000, what can we do? And we can work with you to figure out how you can allocate that money. You can pick a country, pick a project, whatever you'd like to do, and have that satisfaction over the next year of knowing when you're watching the news and you're seeing all the depressing stuff happening in the world, you'll know that somewhere in Vietnam a computer lab's opening, or somewhere in India a girl from a lower caste is being told for the first time in her life, we believe in you. We want you to be in school. That is in our power. We also have a special announcement that during the book tour, I've got a $500,000 challenge grant from a pool of investors. Every donation being made during book tour up to $500,000 is being matched dollar for dollar. So your money will go even further. But anyway, that's it. Thank you so much for your attention, and I'm totally happy to...
I'm thinking maybe here. That way we'll sign books here. But do you want to do a little bit of Q&A first?
Why don't I do like about 3 questions, and then I know some people want the book signed, so let's do 3. Let's do like speed dating Q&A.
Okay, so what do you think was your biggest challenge in opening your schools in underdeveloped countries, and the lessons you would like to share for all those entrepreneurs who want to go and do something?
Without being flippant, I would say read the book, because there's about 270 pages of advice there, and the book's designed to be more like a dinner party conversation. That's very, so I could tell you my advice, but I literally could talk for hours about it. What I'll do is I'll give you my card, and after you read it, feel free to email me. I'm happy to give advice. But it would for people's sake of people's time, if I start talking, we'll be here an hour from now. No, let's be you and me. These people will have left. Yes. Yes.
Okay. Do you speak of other NGO organizations? I'm a volunteer. For example, I'm a volunteer for this organization called China Tomorrow Education Foundation. So we have set kind of a small scale, not like your
Yeah.
large scale. So
Yes. We should talk more. We do partner with other NGOs, quite a few of them. We have dozens of NGO partnerships. What I'll do is I see a queue forming. Why don't I sign books up here? And if people have questions, I'm happy while I'm signing to take them. And for those of you, please buy several copies and pass them along. Thank you.